Hello, it's nice to be with you this morning. I'm here in Tifton, Georgia at the TIFTuf field. My name is Brian Schwartz. I'm a turfgrass breeder at the University of Georgia. I'd like to share with you the story of how TIFTuf was developed, first by Dr. Wayne Hanna in 1992, further research by me when I arrived in 2009, jointly developed by the University of Georgia and the USDA ARS. We're proud of the grass and we're excited about this release going forward in the future. And really, we're most interested in improving the drought tolerance of grasses in the U.S. And we've been funded to do so, and we think we've done it. There are really three types of drought tolerance that a grass can have. The first being avoidance, where a grass plant can grow deeper roots and get down to water that other species can't get to. And this is a great type of drought tolerance in soils that allow it. But there's certain types of soils that this isn't possible, whether it's layering or other issues where deeper roots really don't matter. Then there's a drought tolerance type called escape, where the plant just goes dormant. And this is okay in certain situations where the homeowner or the user doesn't mind a brown grass that's completely dormant that will return when rainfall returns. But for us, that's not what we were looking for. We were really looking for a grass that could stay green longer, so that as the homeowner walks out to their lawn, they see a pretty green grass and they don't trigger their irrigation system. And there's several ways to go about getting a grass like this, and one of those would be to study it to figure out if a grass like TIFTuf actually uses less water. And there is a lot of advertising or research that has gone on in the past where a company may claim such and such variety uses 21% less water than another variety. And that's all well and good, but being from the university and having a scientific background, I wanted to do this research ourselves and study our grasses to make sure that when we say they use less water, they do, and not only here but across several environments. One of the main goals I had when I started in Tifton in 2009 was to study the why of why TIFTuf was remaining green in a drought. And we did this by imposing drought under natural conditions as we have here in the southeast from time to time, but also under rainout structures where we can specifically exclude rain and study the responses of the grasses. So from 2009 to about 2013, I grew the grasses here in Tifton and in Griffin, Georgia at our other research station with Dr. Paul Raymer to study how this grass responded without water, without supplemental water. And for me, my first question was, well, I wonder, does TIFTuf have deeper roots? So I spent 2 years taking 1 meter deep soil cores and measuring all winter long the roots from 10 centimeter sections. And after 2 years of long, hard research, we found that TIFTuf does not have more roots than Tifway, for example. So that was cool to hear from a scientific perspective, but really not helpful from my understanding of why TIFTuf is so much more drought tolerant. So not 2 years wasted, but 2 years of learning. The next question was, well, how can we determine if it's using less water? And I'm a plant breeder by background training. I'm not a physiologist, so I worked with physiologists to get advice and methodology to study how can we tell if a grass is using less water. And one of the methodologies used to study if a grass is using less water is to bury soil moisture probes about 1 meter deep into the ground. And these probes allow you to track water use as a drought is coming through and the grasses are going dormant or becoming stressed. So we did another 2 years of research here in Tifton and at Griffin, Georgia, where we studied the water content of the soil during a drought from Tifway, from TIFsport, and from TIFTuf. And we found very interesting results. It was our first indication ever of why TIFTuf is more drought tolerant than Tifway or TIFsport. And it was, as the drought continued, the moisture in the soil underneath our TIFTuf plots remained for longer. And you could see it dramatically on top as the Tifway and TIFsport plots became dormant with drought. The TIFTuf plots did not, they remained. And it was a direct correlation to the moisture level in the soil. And it was really an exciting kind of discovery because this is a great type of drought tolerance. As I described earlier, if it goes brown, that's okay, but we would like a grass that stays green for longer and can save water. and not just save a little water. Our results found that we could save up to 38% more water than a variety such as Tifway. And if you expand that on a city or a state or even the South, that's a huge amount of water savings. Almost more interestingly, as we're saving water, the TIFTuf plots and the TIFTuf fields actually stay green longer. So it is that situation that we hope for, that as a homeowner or a golf course superintendent or a sports turf manager goes to their lawn or their course or their field and does not see stress, they're not going to water and save water and also have a beautiful lawn at the same time. So it's important that we studied this in Georgia, but we had bigger plans for TIFTuf. We want it to be used across the whole South. And it's very important to do a lot of testing to make sure you don't release a product that gets out to the public and then fails. So we had a great support from not only University of Georgia and USDA ARS, but we also received a federal grant to study the drought tolerance of a lot of grasses, Bermudagrasses, Georgia grasses, St. Augustine grasses, and seashore paspalum under drought locations at 7 farms at 5 universities across the U.S. And actually, being that this grass was developed in 1992, it wasn't part of the grant per se, but it was a drought standard. And so it was planted at every trial, and we watched the drought response at Oklahoma, at Texas College Station, at Texas Dallas, at North Carolina Raleigh, at Florida and Gainesville, Florida and Jay, Tifton, Georgia. And we were able to collectively see the response of DT1 TIFTuf across all these locations, and sure enough, it's been wonderful. During the first establishment phase, it ranked right along there with Tifway, Celebration, when well watered and growing in, but it showed better adaptation even at some of these locations and rated higher for turf quality. But the real difference became clear when we imposed drought across all these locations, and TIFTuf rose to the top. It was better than all the standard grasses, as it was better than Tifway, developed in Tifton here in the 1960s. It was better than Celebration. It was better than Latitude 36. And that's on average across these locations. So it was very good to see. It was nice to have the results that we saw here and that we experienced here in Tifton correlated to what people were seeing across the rest of the country. And so the main point that we can draw from this is that it's not that TIFTuf was perfect under long-term drought. That would be misleading for me to say here that it never doesn't look beautiful. It's that it remains acceptable. And that was our number one goal, is because nothing is perfect. But as stress comes, and in this case drought stress, TIFTuf remained acceptable while others had gone completely dormant. While Tifway, while Celebration, while Latitude had gone completely dormant, TIFTuf remained acceptable. And that's what we were looking for. So I've included some pictures here, and you can see the end of our SCRI drought trials in which these had actually been abandoned. And we have Latitude 36, we have Tifway almost completely dormant, Celebration looking a little bit better, which we would expect because that is an improved grass that came out more recently. But here, just to tell the story, TIFTuf looking green as can be, and this is after almost a year of abandonment. So when I arrived in 2009, Dr. Hanna took me to the field, and not only did he tell me the history of the program, but he had been here almost 33 years, 35 years at that point, and he had a pipeline of grasses that had been developed for years and years before. And he brought me to a set of 20 grasses, and he said, "Brian, the next variety is in these 20 grasses. We just haven't done enough research on them." And in that set was TIFTuf. And in my first 2 or 3 years here, I saw what Dr. Hanna saw in these grasses. And we experienced them through research, and we watched them through spring green up, through summer droughts, and through fall dormancy. And TIFTuf was on the top of my radar. The first trial that I went off campus with here was in Jay, Florida with Dr. Brian Unruh, and he had a trial to study the drought tolerance of all species of grasses in a system called a linear gradient irrigation system, where he's able to impose a gradient of irrigation and subsequent drought in the same trial. And so you can actually monitor all these grasses from well watered all the way to drought stricken in one trial. And so in 2010 or so, we took TIFTuf to Brian Unruh, and he planted it and he researched it himself. And he found many of the same things we did here in Tifton. But to summarize what Brian saw there in Jay, Florida, is he had several grasses all planted together, from Bahia grass to St. Augustine grass to Seashore Paspalum to Bermuda grasses. And from one edge of the field, from 0 extra irrigation to the center of the field where he was completely watered, he was able to pick out the responses of these specific grasses. And for instance, here we have TIFTuf versus Celebration Bermudagrass, where you can see at the very edge, TIFTuf does not look perfect, but it's that acceptable turfgrass that we're looking for with 0 extra irrigation in Jay, Florida. And then back to the back of the field where you can see it just beautiful with that extra irrigation, as opposed to Celebration, where at the edge of the field it started to go completely dormant, and you can see a progression backwards towards the middle of the field where it becomes acceptable itself. And so having this data, having this research in combination with ours, just builds credibility to the grass itself and to the research we're doing here. But it actually only brought up more questions. As Dr. Hannah and I had set out to develop a grass that was drought tolerant, people said, well, that's good, but what about its traffic tolerance? You know, if this is going to be a good grass, it's going to be used everywhere, not just home lawns, not just golf courses, but how's it do on a sports field? Because right now, Tifway, you know, it's primarily the warm season grass used, and we want to know, the drought tolerance is not enough. We want to know how it does on a sports field. You know, for instance, Sanford Stadium is using Tifway right now. How can we convince the University of Georgia to change over to TIFTuf? And so we had to invent different machines to do this, because we can't compete out on our research plots. We can't bring in a sports field team. We cannot have kids playing, but we can make a machine that puts out wear and stress, and we can rate that. So we copied a machine developed at Michigan State called the KD Traffic Simulator. I actually worked on one of these in grad school, and it had some problems. So we modified it to have a mechanical spring system where we had cleats on the bottom of an aerifier, and these springs and compression and cleats actually simulate the wear in between the hashes on a football field or around the goal box on a soccer field. And over years of research here on the Tifton campus, at our plots at the ABAC campus, we were able to impose wear on TIFTuf, on Celebration, on TIFGrand, on Tifway, on Patriot, and some others. And we were able to watch their wear as they decreased in turf quality over the season, as you would expect with tremendous amount of traffic. But we also saw the recovery each week. And it was these trials that led us to believe that not only is this a drought tolerant grass, but TIFTuf is also a wear tolerant grass, which is explained by the mechanisms it has. When it's well watered and when it's fertilized, it can recover. And also it's that triploid hybrid growth habit where the leaves are upright and they're dense, which leads to traffic tolerance and a little bit of wear resistance. So that was exciting to see. Research is continuing here in Tifton. We did that set of trials as a way to almost prove the concept that TIFTuf could be used in the sports field index. And now we're actually using it as a standard for our future breeding program. Which leads us to other traits that people would ask about. Well, it's drought tolerant. Maybe it has some wear tolerance, but how does it do in the spring? We have a lot of problem with Bermudagrass green up in the spring with winter kill, with spring dead spot, that sort of issues. So how does this grass do in the spring? And so our experience in Tifton and at other locations is that it is a very strong grass in the spring. It comes out early and it comes out healthy, and it can almost outcompete other plants that may be there, whether that's overseed or whether that's just coming out of dormancy on its own. So we've observed it versus Tifway. And in certain trials, it's been equal to Tifway in the spring. In other trials, it's come out earlier. It's been compared to Tifgrant. It's been compared to Celebration. And in that case, it's usually earlier to come out and a lot greener in the spring. So an interesting thing about this is every location is going to be different. And TIFTuf being in the NTEP trials, the National Turfgrass Evaluation Program trials right now, we have the opportunity to see spring green up of this grass across the whole country now. And it's been almost as we've seen here in locations where the winter can separate the differences in the grasses. It has been at the top. So another question people ask, fall dormancy, which is really relevant today because we're here November 24th and the leaves are falling and the crops are being harvested, and we actually had our first freeze this morning, and this is the grass here. It's as green as it can be, and this is what we see versus other grasses. If you could look around here, we have Comber Bermuda over there, we have Celebration over there, we have other grasses that are going dormant, and it's that natural Bermudagrass dormancy. As the daylight changes, as the cold weather comes, it's the response of the plant. Where TIFTuf, it historically has remained greener into the fall by a couple weeks, which has been a great attribute for this. And it's one that we're not only seeing here at Ben Copeland's place in Perry, Georgia. We've been able to watch this as we planted a trial there and at North Georgia Turf's farm in 2012 to watch Tifway versus TIFTuf, to watch Tifgrant versus TIFTuf. You can even see it from our Google Earth satellite that TIFTuf remains greener as Tifway in this case is going dormant. So I always like to joke that if you can see it from space, I think you'll be able to see it in person. So with the data we were pulling out, there was actually more questions. And one of the biggest questions that people will have is, well, how will TIFTuf do in the shade? And as we all know, if a grass is going to a home lawn, there's a chance that it's going to run into tree problems, shade issues. And I didn't want to do formal shade trials because when I think about Bermudagrass, I don't think about shade tolerance. I immediately think of other species, say for instance in warm season grasses, Georgia grass or St. Augustine grasses, which aren't perfect. They all have other issues with diseases or insects, but they are more shade tolerant typically. Or in your cool season grasses, tall fescue in the shade. So when people ask about shade tolerance of Bermudagrass, sometimes I shy away. But it is a legitimate question and we do need to know. So rather than start a formal trial with shade cloth, I wanted to know how they would do in the real world. And to do that, we picked a home lawn in 2013 that we could plant with big pine trees, with dogwoods. And I thought over the years we were going to do this, and I was just going to be able to tell people, look, there's this grass, TIFTuf. It's really drought tolerant. It has wear tolerance. Does good in the spring, does good in the fall, but it's just like Tifway. It's not very shade tolerant. I was surprised though. By 2013, the grass was looking pretty good. Where we had pine straw beds around the big pine trees and around the dogwood where the centipede grass wouldn't grow, TIFTuf was encroaching in on the trunks of those trees, and it wasn't drought stressed as often happens around big mature trees. By 2014, the homeowner had asked me, can I remove those beds altogether because I can't keep TIFTuf out of the beds and it looks good without it. And I said, okay, go ahead, man, it's your lawn. It was totally opposite of what I thought. So we really began to document the shade tolerance of TIFTuf in this lawn when sod growers who had come to visit me wanted to see it, and they said, Brian, how shady is this lawn? Bermudagrass shouldn't be growing here under these 60, 70-year-old pine trees or under this dogwood tree that's just shady for the whole season. And so talking with other people who had done shade research, we bought light bars and we were able to measure the intensity of the sun over the entire day for several days out in the full sun and correlate that and relate that back to the intensity of the sun underneath these pine trees or underneath the dogwood. And the pine trees, they allow sun in the morning and in the evening, but you have heavy shade in the afternoon. So the light intensity underneath the dogwood tree is very low because it only really allows sunlight in the very early morning and in the late afternoon. And so these measurements allowed us to see that you're about 50% of sunlight underneath the pine trees and you're about 25% under the dogwoods. And yet we were able to maintain pretty good quality in most places. We're able to avoid the drought that roots cause and able to make energy even with the lower sunlight. And really, that lawn was the start. That was where we really decided that, hey, this has a good application for homeowners. And although we are starting official shade trials now, specifically with other grasses, with other species that we know to be shade tolerant, but we thought more important to really compare it in real lawns. And I think that is where we're making a huge difference, that prior to release, we planted a lawn in Florida because it's a different environment than we are. And it can be shady and it's real world. So we put a grass in Jacksonville, Florida. At the same time, we also planted one in Atlanta, Georgia on the red clay, where it's totally different than Tifton. And watching the grass there do good in the sun, do good in the shade, it's been comforting as the developers to know that it does do well out there in the real world under homeowner management. To answer our real questions about drought tolerance in TIFTuf, I think we had to get out of the southeast. And so we put a lawn in Austin, Texas on their limestone shelf in the hill country in a neighborhood where the builder mandates Tifway in the front lawn and you can do whatever you want in the back. And so this particular homeowner, we put TIFTuf in the back lawn, and in the droughts of the last year or two, TIFTuf has shined over Tifway and really made us proud and the homeowner happy, and he's just asking us when can he replace his front lawn with the TIFTuf. So it's the correlation of research on the research stations here with scientists, with collaborators, but the ultimate use in the real world that makes us excited. And it all comes back to what we think you're going to see when you have this grass. In the Perry, Georgia farm, you can see this drone pic where Tifway in a drought has started to fire. And if you were a homeowner, or if you were a sod grower, or if you were a sports field manager, you would water the Tifway at this look because it's about to go dormant. When over here on the left, TIFTuf is looking almost as good as the day we planted it. And so it's this end result. It's this what we were looking for as we were looking to save water. We're looking to have a good overall grass that can be utilized throughout the southern U.S., but we really hope throughout the world where it can be grown. So it's the results where we believe that other Bermuda grasses are going to go dormant in a drought, where TIFTuf will remain green and healthy and strong, that'll make it a success, not only in Georgia, not only in the southeast, but hopefully the whole southern United States and even other parts of the world where it can be grown. And it's the years and years of research where we've come to the conclusion that TIFTuf is more drought tolerant than Tifway, than Tif Grand, than Celebration, than Latitude 36. It greens up faster than many of the other Bermuda grasses. It goes dormant later to save our resources so that we can use water in other places.